What readings these are. What readings they are. My friend, many of you know, Sister Mary Frances, a Franciscan sister, died unexpectedly from complications from a car accident on June 9th. I got the news while I was on retreat, and it was already, to be honest with you, the crummiest retreat I've ever been on. The bishop called me over at the priest gathering we had that very day that I was leaving for retreat, and with the vicar general, told me that he wished for me to move. It was not official at that point, but he wanted me to pray about it on retreat. And you know, if somebody who's a superior says you got to pray about this, you got to pray about it. I didn't want to pray about it. But I spent some time just on that retreat, just feeling all the feelings that some of you are maybe feeling now. Like, it's not time for me to go, and I have so much more I want to do, and this is my family. And then, in the midst of all that, Sister Mary Frances died. And suddenly, this retreat, which was all over the place, became very focused, laser focused. Isn't that true? That sometimes we can't get perspective until we think about the ultimate things, until we think about death. Many of you know who I mean when I say Barb Semix. She's that sparky little woman in Coxsackie who joined the church through the RCIA program in 2016. The story of how she joined is very simple. Annalise Blosser died, who was a longtime resident here in New Baltimore. And when she came to the funeral for her friend Annalise, she wasn't a Catholic, but she walked into St. Mary's and she looked at the crucifix. Every Catholic church has a crucifix, not a cross, a crucifix, not something decorated with flowers and a shroud. A crucifix where you look at the very worst moments of Jesus' life. When we come here together, even if it's for a joyful thing like a baptism, we don't forget that life has struggle. We don't forget that Jesus, who was God, was not spared from this experience. So looking at the crucifix is meant to focus us. So many people have had conversations with me about what it meant for them to look at the crucifix during the hardest time in their life and how it helped them persevere. And it can help us persevere when our priest is getting moved, or if we're the priest getting moved. You know, I spent a lot of time on that retreat, as I said, saying, I'm not ready. It's not time. I have more work to do. This is my family. But Sister Mary Frances died so suddenly. And if you heard the Profile of Endurance interview that I did with her, you know that she was raising her 10-year-old grandson at the time. You know that on top of being a sister, she was in her 70s raising this child because her family had a crisis, and her daughter was coming through a very hard time, and she was giving her such support. And she was changing the lives of the kids at St. Joseph's Catholic School in Anderson, South Carolina, where she ministered. But June 9th was it. June 9th was the day she was called home. And when we're called home, it doesn't matter if we're done or not. We somehow have to go. And that's one of the things that makes life really precious and really challenging. We have to live knowing that. Because of the focus that death brings, the second half of my retreat didn't allow me to spend all of that time fretting and feeling unfocused and panicking. It became the number 2 issue in my life. I had to focus on honoring and loving and grieving over my friend. There's a story that reminds me of about a monk who lived on the edge of a little town about the size of Ravenna. And there were woods around the town, and he lived in a little hermitage on the edge of town. He didn't have a monastery. He lived completely alone. And he had no money. All he did was pray for the town and the world full time. So the people took care of him the way many of you take care of me, with eggplant parmesan. They took care of him. They made sure he had food. They were loving. They always felt blessed because there was this monk that they didn't get to talk too much, but they knew he was watching over their town. So one day there was smoke rising from the direction of the woods where his little cabin was, and the townspeople ran over, and sure enough, the cabin was fully engulfed in flames, and the little monk was sitting on a rock watching his house burn and crying. And the people said, "Oh, brother, your house. This is so terrible." And the brother, as he cried, as he wiped away tears, said, "It's going to be okay. This will just make it easier for me to die one day." Have you ever thought about losses like that? There's going to come a time when there's going to be an eye of a needle that we have to pass through that only our soul can fit through. And it's true for all of us. They say that death is a test that everybody has to take, and no one fails. But this is where we hear the first reading come in. We hear in the book of wisdom, don't worry about death. God made us to be imperishable. Don't worry about your cabin burning. God made you imperishable. Don't worry about ever not existing. God designed us in God's own image so that that's not possible. We will never not exist. We are imperishable. And that's why something beautiful is going to happen in just a few minutes. When we get ready to baptize Ava and Erica and Luciana, we're going to be able to call on all of those women and men in our lives and in the church's life who've gone on to God, because they're imperishable, because they can't be taken from us, because this is the reality that God has woven into life. That's why Jesus is the only person in the room where the little girl has just died who's calm. Everyone is so upset. He is calm because he knows that that litany of the saints that we're about to talk about, whether she gets up and rises or whether she lays in her grave, she is not lost to God. God is the master of the dead and of the living. So trust is the virtue we're trying to work on with these readings. Trust. What amazing timing. When I was so troubled by the news that I haven't been able to share until now, and I looked at the readings that God gave me for the dreaded weekend when I had to talk about it, look what God gave me. Look what God gave us. Jesus says, don't be afraid. Just have faith. Just have faith in everything. Just have faith. He says she's not dead. She's only sleeping. What looks like death is not death to God. To Jesus, everyone's alive. And if we're united to him, if we're part of the body of Christ, we're called to see with those eyes. Trust is what tells me that somehow I'm going to be okay in the fall when it's my time to go. And trust tells me that the new priest, Father Joe, is going to be just fine coming here after some of the challenges he's had with losing his sister and his father in close proximity in the past few months. It tells me that however we're going to do this with so many fewer priests than we used to have, we're going to be okay. We're going to find our way through. It tells me that Mary Frances is in glory. She's okay. Jesus says, don't be afraid, just have faith. I got a great gift recently when I was in the middle of being so troubled. I went to the grocery store and I was totally preoccupied, and I put my groceries on the conveyor belt. And I said to the cashier, how are you today? And she said, I'm amazing. And I said, I've never heard that answer before. That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear it. And she said, how could I not be? God put me on the wake-up list this morning. God put us on the wake-up list. That's a reason for joy. And guess what? One day God won't. One day we're going to make our journey to our true homeland, and we won't be on the wake-up list for that day. But evidently, it's not today. So let's just have faith. Jesus tells us everything's going to be okay.